I'm a believer that this team's going to win the national championship.
Something stupid is coming out of his mouth.
I don't know. Maybe it's just my age. He needs his vote pulled immediately. And of course, yes, a season like this has to have a name.
Let's talk about something good about Justin Freck. What are you doing?
Season of dreams. Ohio State, my guys, are either the best or the second best program in the history of college football.
This guy is a bonehead. They love him.
I question your judgment as an adult. I really do.
I was a total hater. I know that for a fact, and I just don't get it.
Get us back our sleeves.
And say, bring me that. That's the one I want. And welcome into Juckonbucks. Appreciate you so much for joining me. I apologize for no show earlier this morning. It's been a rough one. We woke up Christmas morning with an incredibly sore throat, and I woke up our hero, Mrs. Juck, told her that I was sick, as if she was going to leap out of bed and patch me all up. She says I'm like a child when I'm sick. She might be right. Regardless, I had to sit at home by myself while the whole family went to my brother's to celebrate Christmas. Didn't get to see my nephews open up their autographed photos of Terrell Pryor, Beanie Wells, Davon Hamilton, Thaddeus the Baddiest Gibson. They love the older era players, which I think is awesome. They're little kids. That's so cool. Nevertheless, as long as I'm feeling good on Monday, that's all I care about, because Monday it is off to California to head out to the Rose Bowl for the first time. But not California. I've been there before, but never been to the Rose Bowl. Had I bought this package before, when I was talking about it on the show with you guys, it was going to cost about $3,000. But I waited. Now, $5,500, which is just, it's a killer. But I had a linebacker coach, and this made me think of him. He used to have these sayings, and he would yell something and we would yell back. And one of the things he used to say was, he who hesitates, and we would yell back, loses. Now, that's not as catchy as a couple of the other ones. What makes the grass grow? Blood. What's the deal? Hit to kill. Those ones were much more fun. But in my adult life, hit to kill doesn't come up often. He who hesitates loses. That comes up a lot. I often think of him, and that's why coaches are important. But I lost out. I'm spending more money, but I still won. An expensive trip, especially just for a few days. But it's going to be an amazing time with my lady and 100,000 friends and frenemies out there at the Rose Bowl for the first time. We have no idea the next time we're going to have a consequential game at the Rose Bowl. It's essentially on every football fan's short list to see their team in a game that matters at the Rose Bowl. And not only that, but we have a rematch of the single best game of the regular season in 2024, the Ducks, the Bucks. And there is a possibility, the way this is setting up, man, I'm a big fan of stories, right? 2014 was an amazing story. This is certainly setting up to be another one of those seasons. It really is. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but when you look at the circumstances with the game, with the head coach of the team taking so much fire from the media, from his own fans, the Tennessee game, all the Tennessee fans, the performance they put on, heading out to the Rose Bowl for the rematch, it feels like the start of something much bigger. And we're hearing many, including our buddy Dylan, say, whoever wins this game is going to win the national championship. Now, I dislike getting that far ahead of it. It's fun to think about, but this is football, man. Should you play Texas in the following round, we're talking about a 3-point line in the national championship, potentially against a Georgia, a Notre Dame, a Penn State, less than a touchdown line. And we have seen, I think, more than anybody, near misses when it comes to national championships. So thinking that way just almost makes me feel like I'm jinxing it. But the winner of the Ohio State-Oregon game will be most people's pick to win the national championship. That's for sure. But this is a rematch. And I went back and I checked all the recent rematches from 2024 on, because I wanted to go and see if there was any trends. And we're going to go over that. But I started discussing rematches as we have one ourselves, obviously. And I was very high on Oregon as a program heading into this year as they entered the Big Ten for the first year. And one of the segments I did when I first started the show, I actually did a full show. I didn't air it. It was like my third episode because my brother said I sounded like Stephen A. Smith. So I did not air the show, but I did pull out a clip from it. and it was about Dan Lanning in Oregon, and I called it the scariest man in college football. And that got a lot of college football fans mad, calling me an idiot. A lot of Buckeye fans angry at me. And the common refrain was, this dude just lost to Washington twice. He's never won a big game. You're an idiot, LOL. Oregon has never won a natty, LOLZ. I said, that's all correct. All that's true. And it's all about to change. And he's about to start acquiring talent like we've never seen anyone at Oregon acquire talent. And we're about to start seeing them win battles against Ohio State. Now, I had no idea they would win so many of them, but Dan Lanning has got unique qualities that has everything around that program energized to the 10th degree. And not only that, but he showed them that he loves them too. After their previous two coaches left them for better jobs, Florida State and Miami, though they both had connections to Florida State and Miami, Dan Lanning said, I'm staying right here. I can do everything I want to do right here. And when he told them that, the buy-in and support and mutual love between head coach and supporters of the program, administration of the program, it's just, it's second to none right now. The young men relate to him. He's one of those type of dudes that you hear. You can apply this phrase. It's an old one, but I always used to hear my dad say it. Men want to be like him and women want to be with him. Like, obviously that's, you get my point though. Young people like him, men admire him, and, he's just got it all. He's a dreamboat. He's got it all. You could not design. I think I'm supposed to say pause right there. You guys told me pause. You get my point though. I don't think you could design a modern head coach in a lab any better than Dan Lanning. Like, I think if you went and sat down and designed the perfect head coach for this era right here, it would look very similar and have the similar qualities that Dan Lanning has. And 9 months later, after I did that video, the only ones who are still out on Dan Lanning are just moving the goalposts, saying he's not won a natty. No, he's not yet. It's his third year, and it's not over. There are only 2 active coaches who have won a national championship now that Mac Brown's retired. And one of them, Dabo, is out of the playoffs, and a lot of people think he's washed. Do we see someone new joining that club, or does Georgia win the national championship? If Georgia doesn't, someone new enters that club, meaning there will once again be 3 active coaches with a national championship. Who do we got? Ryan Day, Dan Lanning, Steve Sarkisian, Marcus Freeman, James Franklin, and Kenny Dillingham. All 6 of them trying to join Dabo and Kirby to be active national championship winning coaches. And no, I'm not including the coach of the team that Penn State has a scrimmage against as they walk into the Final Four, the ridiculously overrated Boise State team. Side note, people over here talking about Indiana, SMU not deserving to be in because of their schedule and their strength of schedule. I just cannot believe that somehow Boise State has got a pass in this argument when they have beat 7 teams with a losing record, 7 G5 teams with a losing record. They were advanced to the second round and patted on the back for a job well done because they lost to Oregon close. And they have a popular running back who's excellent. Yes, I absolutely want Alabama, South Carolina, Miami in over this imposter of a competitor. This team does not belong here. And I'll get the angry Boise State fan in here who for some reason watches me every day. And every time I bring up Boise, he calls me a hater. I am a hater. If you cannot get into the Big 12 with Houston, then you should not be in the playoffs with Georgia, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Texas. You don't belong. You're taking a spot from one of the 68 teams that do belong. And if it weren't for Ashton Genty being so popular, there's no way this would have happened. Yes, they hung with Oregon. So did Idaho. The Ducks stumbled out of the gate. If they had a big out-of-conference game, they might have lost early on. And I got nothing against Boise or the G5. I love the G5. I would love a G5 playoff. I love the FCS playoffs. I love Division III playoffs. And of course, I'd love a G5 playoff. This is a stance against the G5 farce in a 12-team playoff. And the unfair advantage, this is just as important, the unfair advantage that it gives the team like Penn State this year. And we'll see how this goes. But you're looking at Penn State, who's been able to have SMU at home, and then what I feel is going to be a walkover against Boise. A walk in to the Final Four with fewer injuries and everything else. It's just, it's totally unfair. Now, many talk about how hard it is to beat a team twice in the same season. So I wanted to go back to high-profile rematches over the last 20 years in college football. There are not many. So I went back 20 years. We got 5 rematches that I think are of consequence. And I wanted to see if there's a trend that we can apply to the Ohio State-Oregon rematch. So in 2003 and 2004, January 2004, you had Miami and Florida State play twice. They played earlier in the year. Miami won 16-14. That was Miami's last year in the Big East. Before they joined the ACC, they still have not won the ACC. And they also won the rematch 22-14 in the Orange Bowl. So Miami wins both. And those two teams were pretty even. I think if they played 10 games, it would be split 5-5. In 2011, you had Alabama and LSU play that regular season game 9-6 in a game many despised. And then they ended up getting put by the BCS in a rematch in the national championship. And in the rematch in the national championship, Alabama won 21-0. And those two teams, if they played 10 games, I think they would have split them 5-5. In 2021 and 2022, Alabama and Georgia rematched. Alabama won the SEC championship game 41-24. Georgia came back and won the national championship 33-18. Again, 10 games, 5-5 in my opinion. Those were very evenly matched teams. In 2022, you had USC and Utah. This is one that Ohio State benefited greatly from. USC loses to Utah 2 times. The second time in the conference championship game, Ohio State was idle that week and jumped over USC to get into the playoffs, to get the opportunity to play Georgia in a game that we still discuss today. It was a loss, but maybe Ryan Day's best coaching job ever, though I think you might be able to have a debate now with the Tennessee game. But USC, I don't think goes 5-5 with Utah. I think Utah wins 7 out of 10. USC just could not, they didn't have the defense to handle it. So 2 for Utah. Then you go to Washington, Oregon last year. The team we're playing in the Rose Bowl, and the Ducks lost twice. Both games by a field goal or less. And I think that if you played 10, we're looking at 5-5. So 5 total teams matched up with a rematch. 3 times we saw one team beat the other team twice. Miami over FSU, Utah over USC, Washington over Oregon. And twice we saw them split. LSU, Bama, Bama, Georgia. So is it harder to beat a team twice? I think it's just hard to beat a good team. And not quite so sure that it matters if you're playing them twice. I think a lot of times heading into a game like this, we know, and we'll go over what I think Ohio State needs to do, needs to tweak or should tweak, or already has tweaked since that Oregon game. And we think that the loser is the only one that makes those adjustments. Well, if we're the winner, we know what adjustments the loser is going to make, and we're cooking up our counter to those adjustments. So when we talk about this Oregon-Ohio State game, I think we're talking about very talented teams, and the talent is pretty dang equal. And I think this is going to come down to coaching. I really do. And so what went right for Oregon during that first matchup with the Buckeyes? Heading into that matchup, we had only seen from Oregon's offense the quick game, the short passes. They were like that all year, up until the Ohio State-Oregon game. And their offensive coordinator, Will Stein, to his credit, he was phenomenal. Oregon gets that game with the Buckeyes started just dropping bombs. No doubt Ohio State was caught off guard. Now, that's not an excuse not to adjust, but they were caught off guard. Ohio State was able to get zero pressure all day. No pressure at all. Ohio State had 2 turnovers. Offensively, the numbers were almost identical. If we take a look at the numbers, first downs 22-18. Third down efficiency roughly the same. Bucks were 2 for 2 on fourth. Ducks were 1 for 2. Total yards were almost identical. Passing yards almost identical. Both quarterback performances very good, close. Rushing yards almost the same. I mean, everything was almost the same here. Yards per rush, 4.3 for the Buckeyes, 5 for the Ducks. A little bit of a discrepancy there. You can see the Buckeyes had more penalties. The only thing we can really look at out of these stats and take away, okay, there's something that really mattered, is the turnovers. 2 for Ohio State, 0 for Oregon. So what's changed at Ohio State since that game? I heard somebody say the Buckeyes are getting Will Kazmarek back, and they lost him early in that game. So that's a big change. I think that's an interesting way to pump yourself up. I don't know that had much to do with anything, but the Buckeyes defense has changed. In round 1 of this matchup, JT, Jack, Tyleek, they were stonewalled by the Oregon offensive line. The Oregon offensive line won that battle definitively, and that surprised me. Their staff, the Buckeyes staff, that game was a blessing in disguise because after they saw that, they changed a ton up front in subsequent games. And we saw them add a little bit more here and a little bit more there. Different ways to get pressure. And the rewards outweighed the risks every time they used it. They were flawless with it. And they game planned accordingly. But they've got a whole lot more tools in the bag to get pressure on Gabriel than they did that first time. Now, Gabriel will pick them apart if they go balls out and try to get pressure every time. But he will also pick them apart if he's got all day to throw. What else did the Buckeyes do? Well, we saw tempo from Oregon killed Ohio State late in the game. Hands on hips. Defensive line wasn't ready. They were gassed out. The Bucs simplified how they call. They wanted to minimize the information that they're sending in and focusing on the number one priority. We need to get these guys lined up. And if that means less intricacy on the call, whatever, we need to make sure that they're lined up. So we know that they did that. We also know that against Tennessee, they rotated that front much more than they did in the Oregon game. The Oregon was almost the starters the whole game. In Tennessee, we saw a lot more Kenyatta early on. We just saw some more dudes early on. And that's going to help with them getting gassed. So rotating more, making sure they're getting lined up by minimizing some of the calls and all the new pressure packages. How they call them is going to make it or break it. It's going to be a lot of risk reward, but you've got to get Dylan Gabriel off of his spot because what we do know is their wide receivers are excellent, just like Ohio State's. And when we look back at the Ohio State game against Tennessee, Buckeye wide receivers, 4 out of 5 routes, 4 out of 5 times will drop back. There was a wide receiver wide open. That's what it looked like for Oregon's wide receivers against Ohio State the first time. At least that's what it felt like. Now, Dylan Gabriel played a great game. He was on fire, but he's going to pick them apart if he can sit back there all day and find one of those open wide receivers. I don't care how good the secondary plays, and we know that Denzel Burke did not play great. Another change I think that we're going to see that we've seen a little more of is Jermaine Matthews getting involved. Jermaine Matthews, I think, is the best cover guy on this team. Going to be interesting to see how they use him. But the Will Stein, Jim Knowles matchup, How many stops can Jim Knowles' defense get? This defense has been on fire. On fire. They've limited self-inflicted wounds, and that includes coaching errors like the ones we talked about, rotating, poorly executed simulated pressure. We saw that in the first Oregon game. And player mistakes like Denzel Burke, who I think we all expect to have a better game. Success for the Buckeye defense here, 28 points or less. Oregon's going to score. They're going to win a lot of battles. Every stop that the Buckeye defense gets is going to be a huge win. And if they can produce any turnovers, an even bigger win. Ohio State on offense is up against a better defensive line. In the first matchup, Oregon was missing Jordan Birch. And in round one, that Oregon defensive line won the battle without Jordan Birch. The most shocking thing to me of this game, again, wasn't Denzel Burke getting cooked. It was Oregon winning both lines of scrimmage. I wasn't prepared for that. Now, last week against Tennessee, the Buckeye offensive line held their own. Tennessee, one elite pass rusher. They got 7 tackles for loss, but no sacks. Oregon has 2 elite pass rushers who also play very good against the run. They got Derek Harmon in the middle, and Derek Harmon, I think, probably the first big man off the board, maybe the second big man off the board in the NFL draft. Total stud. He's the one that ripped the ball out of Quinshon's hands. Chip did an excellent job protecting that offensive line against Tennessee. I suspect we're going to see something similar. Will Howard, coming off maybe the best game of his career against Tennessee, played really good against Oregon the first time. So he should be feeling full confidence that this time around he's going to play great too. Jeremiah Smith, 9 catches for 100 yards at Oregon. They can't cover him because nobody can. That was the only game this year that he had double-digit targets, which I think is criminal. That only happened once this year because he's clearly a top 5 weapon in the entire sport. But Emeka also had 10 targets that game for 93 yards, and he's not too shabby either. You had 4 receptions for the running backs out of the backfield. I think the Bucs will need to add to that, as well as incorporating G. Scott into the receiving game. Again, all things that help that offensive line. So we know what Ohio State needs to change. But sometimes, again, we act like the loser is the only one that changes things in a matchup like this. Oregon will be anticipating all these changes as well, and they'll be ready to counter. And this, to me, is a coaching staff game. I think the talent is very even. You could say Oregon's staff won game 1, or you could say Oregon just made a few more plays. But when you got Chip Kelly calling the offense, Jim Knowles calling the defense, 2 of the most respected guys in the entire field, the most expensive assistant coaching pool in the country, I expect Ohio State to win these battles when it comes down to even talent, our coaches against yours. And I expect that they're going to win the rematch. I have seen some. I should have asked Ryan. I was on with my buddy Ryan Winters on Sports Chat 503, who is Oregon alum, Oregon guy, diehard Oregon guy. Oregon, similar to Colorado, has a lot of bandwagon fans that they're not lifelong fans. They don't really know the program. They don't know much of college football. Some of them, they just love the look of Oregon football. It's cool. They love the uniforms and what have you. They love Nike, so they make that association. Oregon's got a lot of them, and I've seen them out there in these Twitter streets talking about the Ducks having home field advantage at the Rose Bowl because they clearly don't understand Ohio State football or the size of the alumni base, the amount of fans in Southern California and in Arizona, and how Ohio State travels. I did think it was interesting that when I was on with Ryan, they had Tennessee out a couple years back, and he said that Ohio State and Tennessee were the 2 best fan bases that ever traveled. Like they filled up Autzen Stadium the most. He said Ohio State was on another level. Interesting. I'm going to clip that out and play that probably. But that Rose Bowl is going to be 50-50 or 40-60, one way or the other. Going to be a ton of Buckeyes there. Going to be a ton of Ducks there. It's going to be amazing. And when it comes to this Ohio State-Oregon matchup, if they played 10 times, I think it would be 5-5. I think these teams are incredibly close. Who's got the momentum? You'd have to say Ohio State. My prediction for the game, high scoring, Buckeyes by 7, 38-31. Bear in mind, I've only picked against Ohio State a handful of times in my entire life. So I don't know what it is. I just can't seem to see them losing. I think they pull this out. And we see the Buckeyes getting geared up to head down to Dallas to take on Texas, because I think Texas will beat Arizona State. And my buddy Dan told me, don't be surprised if Kenny Dillingham pulls something out and ends up beating Texas. I will be incredibly surprised. I will be. I think Texas is going to absolutely win that game. And I really hope they do, because I want, if the Buckeyes can get past Oregon, I want another SEC squad. I want it to be Texas. And I want to go through them. And I would love to have Georgia, because I've always wanted this to go through Georgia in the national championship game. Like I said, I love a story. If you were writing the story, this couldn't get any more perfect than Tennessee, SEC, Oregon comes into the Big Ten their first year, wins the Big Ten. Buckeyes go through them, number one most of the year. Then Texas, the SEC runner-up. Then Georgia, the SEC champion, and the team of the last 4 or 5 years. It doesn't get any better than that. It's lined out. It's perfectly. It's all in front of them. So, I'm dreaming, but it could happen. All right, guys, I had a lot more show planned, but I think that the entertainment value of this show is just in the toilet due to the voice, and it's kind of going out on me. But I do want to thank those of you who put in the comments that you were liking the show for Mom. I showed that to her thinking it was going to make her happy. And she said, honey, I want him to like the show for you, not for me. Like, I want him to, don't you think they should like it? Like, do you tell them how long you put into the show? Please like the show. Please subscribe. Set your alarm bells. I've got a really cool conversation coming up with my buddy, a dude I find really interesting, College Football with Sam. Check him out if you haven't. I'm going to do a conversation just on college football in general with him.
I think that's a genius point by you.
And also a conversation with Ryan Winter, my buddy from Oregon, Sports Chat 503. We're going to have a talk about Ducks, about Bucks.
To have this matchup New Year's Day, it feels like it's the most right thing that's happened in all of college football this year. It felt like the college football gods were looking out for us on this one. And I don't care if it's at the second round of this tournament. This is the best game of the whole thing, in my opinion. And so why wouldn't you want to have it at the Rose Bowl?
Yeah, I'm with you. And, to your Boise point, like I certainly didn't want that either. I wanted to play. And if you look at Ohio State's potential path, should they be able to, make it all the way, it's going to be a path with memorable teams and memorable matchups. Not that I don't want to sound like an elitist, but, I don't want to play Boise or Arizona State in a playoff. Sure. I want to, the fact that we got Tennessee and now it's Oregon, like it just feels great. I love it. Doing all that, hopefully the Pipes can get through it. I appreciate you guys so much. I'll talk to you soon. Juckonbucks out.
He needs his vote pulled immediately.
And I'll say, I don't care. The leader, the boss. Where is Josh Heupel?
The largest humans he can find.
You got Miami and Georgia and Florida State and Tennessee and Texas A&M.
Kirby wants you.
LSU and Ole Miss.
Not even a football player, but he's 6'10", 334. Kirby said, sign me up. That's all they've got to offer when it comes to a defensive player. What could they possibly say other than, how down do you have to be for a win? Let us pay you. All they got to be is enormous. What could they possibly say?
Knock the team out west. Oh, well.
They'll take him if they're lowly rated, too.
I'm not some guy who's some Big Ten homer.
Behind that,
I will never find it